There's a lot of talk about data privacy, data protection. A lot of us actually go into the whole motion without really understanding the implications of it.
It's a question of the type of data that people start generating, the type of data that they start using. Once they become conscious about why it is critical for them, then they will become very conscious about the requirement to maintain the privacy of that.
Legislations cannot be fully generic, and when it comes to data, they have to be very specific.
A very good afternoon to everybody who's present in the room. We're going to take up a very, very interesting session around data privacy and data protection. So in the next 45 minutes or so, we'll not only talk about data privacy, which will impact all of us, and also broadly touch upon what are the initiatives that government has taken and what are the initiatives that the organizations have taken. So before I go into the detailed questions with the respected panelists, I just want to quickly do a quick show of hands. How many of you have ever installed an app on your phone? Quick show of hands. Everyone? Yeah, everyone would have installed an app. How many of you have pressed the button I agree? Yeah, all of them. How many of you have actually read it? Really very far and few between. So I think that's where the tricky part comes in. There's a lot of talk about data privacy, data protection. A lot of us actually go into the whole motion without really understanding the implications of it. So we'll touch upon some of these aspects around data privacy and data protection. I'll just start off with the first question around the culture that we have about data privacy in India, and how do organizations and actually governments look at it. So Ateesh sir, if I can start with asking you, how do you see the overall data privacy culture evolving in India, because it's quite different as compared to how it happens in some of the other countries.
Yeah, thank you. Let me begin by first saying that digitization and digitalization is the train which everybody is trying to catch, and it is the buzzword, the catchword of the day. And mind you, it's not just another train; it's the bullet train. It moves very, very fast, and as it moves, so many things are changing as we go along, and at the pace the things are changing and evolving and developing. Everybody is trying to be abreast with what's happening around it, and let me tell you, not many are being successful at that, because it's just too fast for anybody to handle. So so much so, just to give you a context to that, if sometime back, just a couple of days back, there was this discussion with wherein the president of China and the president of America were having a discussion, and president of China was kind of trying to explain to President Biden that we need to get into autocracy, and democracy cannot sustain the kind of change, the way the pace of change, and simply because of the problem of consensus building. Now, consensus building takes its time, and when you have to take so much time, you may actually lose the chance or lose the opportunity to go along with it. So he was professing a case for autocracy, wherein consensus building can be done much faster, and you can actually go ahead and take decisions. So anyway, so that being that, so I just wanted to let you know, the government also is obviously trying to do a ton of things on the digital front, and especially in the MSME space. And we have our own MSME digital program, and we have several portals where we run different schemes. A lot of schemes are on the internet, and they are being monitored and managed through different portals and websites. And also we encourage a lot of MSMEs to put all their requirements and specifications on those portals, register themselves on the Udyam portal, and the starting point itself is the Udyam registration, which is a digital portal in itself, like my previous speaker was saying. So those are the things which we are opening up, and also in the works is since we have so many portals, we are also trying to develop a portal of portals. We are trying to get into national single window systems. We are developing an ONDC network. There is a ton of things happening around all that space. So all this is part of the digitization effort of the government.
Absolutely, absolutely. Shirish sir, if I can ask the same question to you, how do you see India adopting the culture of data privacy, and how does people in this room, how do we actually reflect on those things?
See, actually speaking, if you look at India and you look at information security first, we have been going through the technology layer, and data privacy has been a new discussion nowadays. But culturally, if you see in India, we have grown up in an environment where we feel it is our right to know everything about everybody. That's the kind of socio-cultural environment that we are in. So when we start talking of privacy and we say that, this needs to go on a need to know basis, I think that is where the interesting conversation starts. We all have worked in organizations where I remember in one of my ex-organizations many years back, when the medical reports for the teams used to come, they used to be all dumped on one table and you go and pick up your own medical report. Well, things have changed now where it is more secure. But so this concept itself is very new, and getting it to people at the ground level will be very challenging, I feel. And while at the same time, we all know that there is a discussion going around it and things are changing, but bringing it down to the last mile will be difficult.
Absolutely. Narendra ji, if I can ask the same question to you, do you see how this culture evolving of data privacy in India? Do you see culture as a big roadblock in the way, as Shirish ji mentioned? How will it impact each one of us?
Gathering intelligence, when you have a lot of ambient noise is very difficult. So, can you just repeat the question? Sorry. I mean, I'm saying that because of, I was not able to catch the question.
Okay. Yeah. Can we increase the volume of the mic a little bit? Okay, so what I was trying to ask is that in India we really don't have the culture of data privacy. Like Shirish sir mentioned that you are bound to share everything with everyone. That's how we have grown as a society. And you travel to a lot of parts in the country, so you'll obviously have a little bit more closeness to that question. So in a culture like how India is, how will we be able to adopt this regulation?
Okay. No, whenever you talk of loss of data of some private individual, it's a question of what are the consequences of that loss of data, that somebody has access to the data. So when we share data, we find that there are no real consequences to that. That's why we are more in the process of sharing it, because we don't find any loss, especially if it's a loss to your reputation. Then it would be very it's not that individuals, they would have some part of the activities which they would not like others to know because it's a loss to the reputation. Maybe some activities that they do, you would find that they would really very, very seriously guard that part of it. So it's not that we are not conscious of the requirement of privacy. People are conscious of the requirement of privacy. It's only a question of the type of data that they've been handling or generating, which was not really sensitive. So they were not really conscious about it. But once you find that, let's say, any individual who starts now, transacting, making all these commercial transactions online, and he understands that he has to keep his, account number or bank password confidential. He's going to guard it very seriously. So earlier that was not required for him. He had a passbook, and he would go to a bank, and there were other ways of doing it. So it's a question of the type of data that people start generating, the type of data that they start using. Once they become conscious about why it is critical for them, then they will become very conscious about the requirement to maintain the privacy of that. So it's an evolving process. So in India also, you can't put everybody in one bucket. So if you will find there is a certain section of population is very, very conscious about the way the data of their data is being handled. There's another section of the population which is not really bothered about it, and it's a graded response. You'll find it's a graded response. So as the society matures, and as you pointed out, and more of digitization happens, and all the transactions like medical records and all, some of the people are not bothered. I see I've got blood pressure, I've got diabetes, I've got cancer, or whatever it is. We go and openly discuss that. And there's societies where you might not be discussing it. So there, if you're not a person that you say that, okay, if my medical records get compromised, then the potential for me to get employed might be compromised. In the sense that people would look at it and say, nah, this is the person whom I would not like to employ because of his compromised health condition. So, I don't think you can paint it with a brush and say that Indians are not conscious about it. They are, to the extent that they look at it, how it's going to impact them, and you will find that evolve over a period of time. And we are at the right moment, where we have a strong regulatory, legislative framework for protecting personal data. It will really help. So I think, yes, we are at a time when it's required.
Thanks, Narendra. I think it's a brilliant answer where you said that it will eventually play out and people will start realizing the importance. So thanks for that input. The next question, and Ateesh sir, if I may ask you, the theme of this whole event is smart city, and of course, as cities get smarter, we will be collecting more and more data about traffic or be it the health of individuals. Now, how does a government look at balancing the amount of data we collect from a smart city perspective, and how do we secure the whole ecosystem within a smart city?
In a smart city? Okay. So, I can't really tell you about the smart city, but I can tell you what the primary, thing, the intent of your question, I can develop on that. Though I know smart city is also the directorate of which is dealing with this subject. They have a entire ecosystem developed around it, and they are trying to get some data. There are several reporting formats, and they have developed a dashboard to monitor that schemes and how they are converting that into information for the purposes of policy. All that is in the works, is going on. But from the data which is getting collected from different portals in the government, there are a number of issues, and while we are trying to develop several areas to protect them, but still there are things which we need to look at. So obviously cybersecurity is certainly a very big threat, and nobody is safe from it. So we've been working on several things. There are firewalls, there are spam protection regulations, there are VPNs which we are working on, there are password managers which we are developing. There is anti-malware software we're putting into these systems over there. We are very, very careful about the hygiene. Then there is a lot of effort going on into the training part to teach the people who are working on this front, and how you have to deal with different kind of protocols and different kind of things which have to be done. Mail attachments, USB drives, those are all things to be very, very carefully dealt with. We're also looking at cryptography. We are working on data encryption, the hash functions of different things. We've also got a lot of activity monitoring programs in the government, in the control offices, in the area, the data centers, and several places where the data is being stored and kept. There is access control. There is a system in place for data loss protection. There also something which we are working with respect to this one, creating awareness in the field units. While all in the ministries, in the headquarters, there is a lot of action, like I said, to get around these things. But in the field, in the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns of India, that's where we need to focus and concentrate. That's where our effort is. So we are trying to create an awareness program to get this thing going on the ground.
Wonderful. So I think it sounds like the smart cities are actually doing as much as a lot of the mature organizations or banks are doing in terms of putting in place security controls. So that's quite amazing to hear. Shirish sir, if I can move to you on the next question. Now, of course, data privacy in India, it's sort of in some ways adopted from GDPR, which is the UK European standard for data privacy. Now they have been going slow on the on fining organization in spite of some breaches. They're taking a more consultative approach with the industry. What is your view around how should India approach this concept of data privacy? Do you think we should go out with a strong hammer, or still have the balance between the carrot and stick approach?
I think yeah. On this approach, it will have to be a little of a carrot and stick, because as I said earlier, there is going to be a cultural change. So we need to consider that, and even in this smart city, this is truly going to be a convergence, which is the name of this gathering, that we are going to have multiple technologies coming in, so we are going to have multiple layers. And when we say that the government is going to collect that data, there is going to be a huge contractor ecosystem over here. and they are going to play out. Now, does that mean here that a simple agreement of non-disclosure is sufficient, or we need more controls on the ground? We need more diligence to ensure, and what is that confidence that we are going to give? Because if it is an organization, even if I'm putting data on the cloud, maybe I can put in more diligence from my side. But in a smart city, what is going to happen is it is an individual who's interacting with a big system.
Yeah.
So how is an individual going to do all these things? So that is where the government, regulations which Sir was mentioning
About.
is going to come into play, because that is going to give me assurance as an individual when I interact with the smart city system.
That my data is secure.
Yes. So now this to happen over a period of time, one is we need to have confidence more in the system. See, one change that the mobile phone did for all of us was we learned to trust blindly. As you rightly said that how many of us download apps? We are using so many payment gateways today.
Yeah.
So none of us really checked. So it has helped us trust. But behind that trust, we need to create those technology and systems. So it will take a little time, and training people on that would also take time. We do see every day in newspapers where still there are news where people, in spite of so many messages that we get from a bank, people even give away their password or OTPs.
Yeah.
So these incidents are still happening, and these are happening in urban areas.
Yeah.
So I think there's a long way to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Narendra sir, any thoughts from you in terms of GDPR, the global regulation? They are sort of adopting a more consultative approach and saying that they're helping industry be more privacy compliant. How do you see it playing out in India from a government perspective, or what organizations should be doing?
I hope we are audible, no, at the end. Okay, thanks. Yeah, see, one thing is there, you started off with the premise that, are we conscious about privacy of data and all, and we find it's an evolving, area. So when we have these regulations coming in, I think it would take time for the maturity to happen. For the organizations to put in place the systems for data privacy and protection, both in terms of the technologies to be deployed, in terms of designing of systems for ensuring privacy, and also the processes to be put in place. So it would be prudent that you have a transitioning that happens once the regulation comes in. A transitioning, like for the GDPR also, you find that there was a time period that was given for people, for organizations to be compliant with the GDPR. So there would be some sort of a transitioning that would happen, and a consultative process, because implementation you would have to take different perspectives into view. One is a consultative process, and then a transitioning happening is how I look at it. For the proper implementation of the regulation that would come in regarding the data protection and privacy of data. And regarding, I think, the smart cities part also, and you talked about consent. When you look at consent, it's not consent is 0 and 1 type of a consent, because I think there will be an element of granularity that would be there with regarding consent. So that the element of what are the different types of data, and what's the type of consent, in terms of the type of consent we give the data, the duration for which the consent has been given. So these are all things that are there. So I think there would be a lot of technology also that would be required for putting in place consent frameworks. And regarding the smart cities also, there is a project of the Urban Development Ministry regarding the IUDX, Indian Urban Data Exchange. So they're coming up with a common platform for data exchange among that is there. So once we have that robust framework for that, then I think that would help in exchanging data within the smart cities itself and between smart cities. And also over that, you can you build all of these consent, privacy frameworks, like multi-party computing or privacy enhancing techniques, and all of that would come over that. So coming from the organization, the National Security Council Secretariat, where we have budgets for R&D. So this is one area where we are working now, especially for the smart city, security of smart cities and the data coming out of the smart cities. So we're working at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where we have given some projects, especially to merge with the IUDX and look at these aspects about, managing consent and the privacy enhancing techniques for that, and how to have even computing part of it. How do you have multi-party computing using the data without and having access to the data in a particular way, so that you don't have privacy preserving, but computing happens. So there are certain things that there's a lot of work that's happening in this area from the government of India.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Narendra, for that answer. Ateesh, again, coming back to you, you worked in the finance ministry, you worked with the railways, you worked with the variety of ministries within the government. What we are seeing in data privacy is, for example, RBI has a regulation that you need to respond to any breaches within 6 hours. Certain says that you need to respond within a few hours. The current law says that you need to respond within. So is there any thought process? Can we converge all these laws so that it becomes easier for the industry? Or do you see this as a more sector-specific approach?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. So while we have a ton of things going around, like I said, in the government space for the purposes of building laws around it, we are drawing from the GDPR, we are also drawing from the CCPA, and we are looking at what else is happening around the world. But like I said in the beginning, it's all the pace is so hectic, it's changing so fast, it's moving extremely at such a fantastic pace, and whatever we try to create today, whatever kind of regulations we try to get into today, the industry has already moved into a different level. So how do you cope with that? That's one of the biggest challenges in regulation and policy making and codification and setting up different procedures and systems on the ground. Being that as it may, there is what has been identified right now. I can tell you that we are looking at breach identification. How we can get into that space. There is a lot of thought which has been crystallized. There is also something on cyber forensics. How we can create that ecosystem and what all needs to get into this space. We are also looking at in the police work. Now there is a lot of the police is lagging behind a lot in this. We've created an economic offense wing, and we've created cyber law, police stations, and so on and so forth. But the police personnel also need training and a very smart skill set to get into these areas and actually help people and the public at large to find the people who have got into cyber crime, who created these problems for people. So we are looking at developing and establishing criteria for attribution, for evidence, for cooperation, for judiciability and penalty. Now there are a number of challenges in that, but these are things which have been identified for working and getting around. And since you mentioned about the RBI and the fintech is an exploding world. It's just happening. One of the there are a number of things which I can talk about. But one thing I want to tell everybody through the medium of this podium is that, and this is what the government is also working very seriously on. There are neobanks, there are account aggregators, there are fast lending organizations which are on the internet. And on the background, there is an NBFC or maybe sometimes even a bank. Now, while you are going to get loans very quickly and very fast and on very easy terms, but there is just look what's happening on the back end. Where is this? How is the risk getting assessed over there? What are the methods of these neobanks and people who are on the P2P platforms, on the crowdfunding platforms, or simply just NBFCs who fronted themselves onto the fintech world? Where is that data coming from? So you'll be surprised. Some of the data is coming from transactions, e-transactions, transactions on e-markets, social media data. All kinds of data is there. Some of it is even coming from the darknet. Now this data is being used to develop a credit score for you, which they call alternative score or super score or true value score and so on and so forth. And that data is being used to assess your risk and then accordingly charge you an interest rate and give you a loan. And in a matter of hours. And then when you realize that this credit score is not really so true, then there is a very oppressive recovery regime which gets after you. Now we need to regulate this. We need to control this kind of a problem which is happening on the ground. It's happening very fast. It's how do you and the whatever we think today, it just moves to another level next tomorrow. So to be able to get around this, we have the RBI has already propounded a sandbox. We can get into a sandbox arrangement, try to find solutions around this. That is just one of the things I wanted to flag and put before this August House. Thank you.
Right. I think that's a great answer. I just want to maybe Shirish, you do a lot of audits as part of your daily job, and you would be interacting with a lot of organizations day in and day out. How do you see the maturity? And you've been in the business for about 25 years. So how have you seen the maturity of organizations go up in the last so many years? Government obviously is coming up with their regulations and laws, IT Act, and data privacy and so. But how do you see the organization's view as to how much they've done? And do you think they've done enough or more needs to be done?
See, firstly, over the last few years, what we can now see is that the awareness levels have gone up. So that is the first thing. And secondly, one more aspect which is helping that is the rate at which it is changing now and the rate at which we are changing our systems to adopt to these digital transformations. This is bringing about more awareness in the people, and organizations now do not have a choice but educate their own people. So I think that is what is positive. And most of these, if you see at even at these management system certifications, they actually help build the awareness. What they did for information security, now they are doing for privacy management. And we have already gone into privacy or PII into cloud, security in cloud. So all these things people are building awareness. But still, the area where one feels that we need to do more is the fact that while we know and we are aware, we still are never sure. We still don't have that full assurance that what we are doing will be sufficient and what should be my role in it. So I think when we are interacting with this ecosystem outside, we need to be more clearer and we need to gain that assurance. So I think that is where that maturity is yet to come. We are still nascent, if you ask me. It is still the beginning. We are touching the tip of the iceberg.
To add to what you said, that is precisely the big problem.
Yeah.
Now the question which naturally follows is that do we need separate and dedicated regulators to deal with this? Do we need a separate? Is the RBI competent to handle fintech, or is the SEBI does it have the wherewithal and the understanding to? Do we need people from the cyber world and from the finance world to sit down together and get into this? That's a question which is being asked around. Do we need specialist regulators? And it is not just a phenomenon in this country, it's a problem across the world, and it's been being debated and discussed all over. So we need to ask ourselves, we need to get into this debate. Yes. Can the present system handle this thing, or do we need specialist people?
Thanks for adding. Narendra ji, do you have a perspective on this? Of course, you've seen the industry evolve, the cybersecurity industry evolve from a government's perspective. How do you see organizations actually, lapping up these regulations which are coming, or how mature have they got, or you still think there is a long way to go for India Inc., so to speak?
India Inc. for what? For cybersecurity?
Cybersecurity.
See, as I said, India is not one bucket. See, there is a wide variety in terms of maturity of industry and in different sectors. And this is something that I've also spoken earlier also. So if you look at the banking sector, for example, you'll find there's a level of maturity there. And among the banking sector also, you have different, you have small banks and all of that. The cooperative banks might not be having the level of expertise that is desired to be there. But you look at the bigger banks, you will find that you interact with them, you find that they're really competent people around there. Not only is there competence individually, but you'll find there is an institutional mechanism that's been built into those banks, which actually can handle. They understand the technologies, they understand the processes, they are latest in terms of what are the threats that are there. and they are competent, okay. So, and you say within the one sector itself, you'll find that's a difference that's there. Then you go across horizontally in different sectors. The telecom sector is also, large extent mature. You come to the power sector, for example. Power sector, for a pretty long time, they were doing some basic stuff. And some organizations in power sector, like Power Grid, might be better than some other organizations. They have a setup inside. You'll find competent people there. But you could not say the same thing of other sectors. So you'll find that there's a different level of maturity. And regarding regulators also, you'll find sectoral regulations are there regarding cybersecurity. Like in the telecom sector, you'll find the licensing conditions. You'll have a separate chapter that is there regarding security and what they're supposed to do. Right from, talking in terms of audits, testing and certification, reporting of incidents, mandatory reporting of incidents, then qualification of people, the type of people who should be manning those positions. Those are all there. And in the banking sector, you'll have RBI has also come up with the detailed guidelines of what's required to be done. The power sector currently is working on that, and shortly, you'll find something happening there. Some of them have, security operating centers. You'll find in the banking sector, for example, there's security operating centers there, and they're able to, all these incidents are getting coming there, and they're able to take action. Telecom sector, they have security operating centers. So you'll find that there's a vast variety in the maturity level, and we have to work. One of the basic things you find is, having a CISO in an organization is very important. Do all the organizations have CISOs? No. And wherever the organizations have CISO, is the CISO a competent person? No, because you'll find that the CISO is functionally in some other aspect, and he's been asked to look after this issue functionality. So it doesn't really understand. And even if he's a CISO, does he have supporting infrastructure below him in terms of manpower? So that whenever the threat intelligence or any of the alerts are generated by CERT or sent to them, are they able to ingest and act on that? There's a problem there. Yes, so there you find that there's a wide variety. So one of the things that's important is to build capacity within the organizations to handle this. So, and in the other is, understanding what is the type of security infrastructure that I should put in place. What is the architecture that I should have? There are a couple of things, and again, I come back to from where we are working, is we're working in having a certification framework. Having the skill sets, identifying the skill sets that are required. What are the roles to be played in the security infrastructure? What are the skill sets that are required? And what's the certification that's required? First of the persons, for the organizations providing training, correct, and the organizations actually providing certification and recognizing this training institutes. So that is one we have asked the NCIIPC, which is the National Critical Infrastructure Protection Center, to come up with that, and they're working with the QCI, the Quality Council of India, to come up with that. They're currently doing that. Hopefully within this year we'll come up with that. The second is regarding, especially for the critical information infrastructure, we are trying to come up with a reference architecture, the cybersecurity reference architecture, so that an organization can look at that and say, okay, these are the components that I should have in my network, in my infrastructure. And they will be able to tick all those boxes and say, this is what are the components I should have. These are the probable vendors who could actually provide that, is one other area we're working at. And I'll tell you, regarding the CISO part, we have got this Rashtriya Raksha University. I don't know if you're aware of it. It's there in Gujarat. It's under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Recently, it's come over. So they started a Bharat CISO program. Wow, okay. Yeah, so that is focused basically on the skill sets that CISO is required to have. So that is another program that has just started this year. So there are lots of activities that's happening. So yes, I think it's a work in progress actually.
Yeah, please go, Shirish.
See, recently we interacted with one electrical distribution company, and they came up with a list of requirements for cybersecurity. And when I asked them for the mapping for it, it was mapped against ISO 27001. And I was trying to understand why an electrical distribution company, which is nothing but a critical infrastructure, trying to go for it. And then I saw that on the government website, CA, that is the Central Electric Authority, they have already put down the guidelines for the electrical distribution organizations to meet the requirements, and that is why they wanted the 27001 framework. So this is something which is very positive from the perspective that today we are downloading those guidelines from a government website, and it is all very clearly written down there. And this is very positive.
Absolutely. So to just add to that, power sector is one, the committee has been formed that's very actively working now, right, with directions from right from the top. So yeah, we'll have. To add to the further point, one other initiative is regarding, equipment getting into it, to have whether they're trusted products or not, getting into trusted sources. There's another initiative that is there. So I think you can we can take it further afterwards.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This is in process, and as we all say, Rome was not built in a day. This will take time. But I think the tagline that we see there is building a digital and smart India. And India, of course, is not just the large financial banking companies. At least I would like to see all the SMEs, and that that's a good segue into the next question, Ateesh, that I have. Now we are, both the panelists mentioned that we've got a robust cybersecurity framework for large organizations. Now, how does the SME sector, and you've been working a lot on the SME sector, how do they adopt some of the good things? And Shirish mentioned that government is doing a lot of things. Are the SMEs actually aware, and what needs to be done to make them more secure so that India as a whole becomes more cyber resilient, so to speak, and what help more is needed?
So, like I said in the beginning, the ministry runs a program called MSME Digital, and it's essentially a program where we, provide. We have to first understand MSME is not startup.
Yeah.
While all startups may be MSMEs, but all MSMEs are certainly not startups. And the other, so I'll come to that. So I just want to first begin by saying that in the program we offer them, a digital identity. We try to create a digital footprint for them, and we help them by offering different toolkits and ERP suites to work, on the ground into their factories and into their establishments, and so that they become more efficient and become part of the digitization and digitalization process. While being that as it may, the challenge over here is that there are different types of MSMEs. There is a micro, there is a small, and there is a medium, and within those you have to appreciate and understand how many of them really understand the IT world. While all of them want to join this, they want to join this bandwagon and want to get into this space, but how many of them really understand what are they getting into is another situation altogether. So one of the challenges is there is a set of MSMEs who have absolutely zero idea. They don't even know what they want. So you have to explain to them that if you get into this, so let's say inventory management, or let's say attendance management. How much of it does he need? Does he need for 20 people? Does he need for 3 people? Does he need for his unit in Okhla? Or does he need it for his own unit somewhere else? How much of it is it required? What is going to be the subscription cost? What are the infrastructure he will have to create? What are the kind of protocols he will have to worry about? He needs constant hand-holding. Then there is somebody in between who knows something, something about it. He's heard from his friends. Some people. So some people have already, in his neighborhood have joined this process. So he has some idea. So, he gets into these kind of other problems. He doesn't understand consent. He doesn't understand protection. He doesn't understand data sharing, all that. So, but he's also there. And then there is this, generally into the medium category where people know what exactly they want. They are, seriously getting into a, problem with respect to cyber security. So these are 3 different levels and 3 different types of organizations and MSMEs who need to, who are moving into this space, but there is a lot of cautious optimism, I would say.
All right. Thanks for that, Ateesh. So moving on to a slightly more trickier question, and Narendra, you might want to have a perspective on this. The government has been sort of quite vocal about data localization, and I think even in the current privacy bill, there is a lot of mention around critical data, sensitive data being hosted in India. Now, do you expect the other countries also to say that even their data needs to be localized, which may work out to be counterproductive in some ways? So, how do you see this data localization element playing out in the data privacy bill?
Yeah. Before I come to that, I'll just at SME point. I just want to talk about. there is a good business case for regarding the SMEs. As you rightly pointed out, they don't know, about how they have to protect the infrastructure, and you can't expect them to, develop the expertise to that, because do they concentrate on the functional, what they're supposed to be doing, the business case, or they're going to concentrate on this aspect? So, like you have a chartered accountant, who is servicing multiple SMEs. uh, Security as a service, I mean, cyber security as a service is a thing that could come about with one common SOC, Security Operating Center, working for many SMEs. We've been interacting with some of the industry bodies. Why not they actually work in this area to come up with this model where a security operating center could be actually providing service to multiple SMEs and also providing security as a service. So that's one thing I just wanted to add to that. That would be a good business case. Regarding data localization, I know I think it would be very premature for me to comment at this, because we do not know how it's going to pan out. But we have to recognize all data is not the same. There will be some data which is very critical, some data which is not so critical, some data which might have to be retained within the country because there are consequences if it goes out of the country. So I think once the bill starts getting debated, talked about, then we would have the fine grain categorization of different data and what data requires to be localized and what data can go out. I think that would how it would pan out. It's not that when you talk about data localization, you're talking in terms of all the data, but we might be speaking of specific data which is critical, might be having some national security requirements because of which it is required to be done. So those are things I think that how it will pan out.
Sure, thanks Narendra for that answer. Shirish, if I can move on to you, again, a little bit more, I wouldn't say controversial, but debatable. So there's an element of this non-personal data in our data protection bill. Now, I think, some of the debates that I've had with organizations, they believe that, you earn money in India, you have to pay tax, right? So it's similar to that. Organization collect personal data, you anonymize it, the non-personal data needs to be shared with the government. I think that's what the construct of the non-personal data is. What is your view around it? And of course, some of the feedback that we are getting from industry is that they don't favor it because that is in some ways their IP, right? So how do you look at this? It's a bit of a tricky question. So
Actually, one thing is when you are giving that data away, if you have to, and if that becomes a mandate for the non-personal data, I do understand that it would be sanitized and then given. But in that case also, it is going to give us trends in that company with regard to the various dimensions, with regard to the skill sets, with regard to the gender that is there. So everything in that company, that data will get shared actually. You may not be able to personalize it, but I do know where that company stands. And that itself is seen by corporates as a risk. Because in today's times, while people are working towards more equanimity, still there is a long way to go there too. So when that is happening, I don't want to be exposed. So I think that is the view that most companies are taking. And that is where it comes to. And eventually there is always that fear of, it getting linked, because at some point in time that trend can be mapped somewhere, So I think that is basically the thing.
Just, I just want to add.
Yeah.
Sure.
So this very interesting thing is happening on this front. The non-personal data which is there on the websites or which is in the public domain. One phenomena is of scraping the data, and people are making millions out of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And simply because the people who put that data out in the public domain, haven't created a legal wall around it. And so I personally feel that one of the starting points to prevent scraping is to develop a legal wall around what you're putting out in the public space, so that it is not utilized for scraping and developing other businesses out of it. And some of it is even going down into different kinds of incredible things. That's another fear. It's misuse of that public data.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Narendra ji, anything you would like to add to that? The non-personal data element of the data protection bill?
Can you come again?
So our data are you able to hear me?
No, actually what? These are all directional mics.
Yeah.
These are all directional mics. I think if you speak from the side, you have to speak from
Okay.
here.
Okay. So the question that I was asking is that the current personal data protection bill has an element of non-personal data which has got introduced in the latest version of the JPC.
Yeah.
Now, from that perspective, do you see organizations being hesitant to share out their anonymized data, which is non-personal data, or do you think this is more like a tax which government needs to collect and the government will own that anonymized or non-personal data?
No. Actually, see, personal data, the non-personal data is the construct that had started parallelly. Then, because data is data, then they said, why have two separate, legislations coming in regarding data, and let's try to combine together and then come up with that. So that's how it has come about. Now, coming to non-personal data, we're looking at it as a public good. How we could utilize it commercially and for other public good also. That's how it's come about. So I think when you look at non-personal data, there is one is non-personal data which has not come out of personal data, because there's one that personal data, you anonymize it and then come into a non-personal data is one part. But there is other data also which is non-personal data by itself. That could be some data pertaining to some environmental data that you're collecting about temperature, pressure, and or soil salinity or sea salinity and all of those things. That's also non-personal data that's getting collected. So, the only issue is that the problem with non-personal data could be also that there are big corporations have access to the data. Now, how do you facilitate access to other people? Because, a lot of innovation can come when people have access to the data. So I think the whole thing would be about how to define the ownership, how do you give it to people so that they can use it, and to what extent they can use it, what rights do they have, how do I limit those rights? So those are all parameters. I think those have to be discussed and then finalized.
Perfect. I think that's a great answer again. I think last question that I have from my side is when do we see the actual bill becoming an act? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So sorry. The bill. Oh, yeah.
So as consultants and auditors, we've been waiting for a very long time for the bill to become an act. So if you have an answer to when the data protection bill will become a data protection law.
No. I wouldn't be in a position to comment on that. But still, the topic is not simple.
Yeah.
And as a democratic country, we have to take every point of view and then come to a consensus before it becomes a law. Yeah.
So, Ateesh, sir, your thoughts on that?
It's not a simple concept.
I cannot tell you anything about that. So I know, but I totally agree with you. Consensus building is certainly the way to go over here, and it's going to take its own time. And like I've been saying again and again, whatever we build today, it runs into the wall of the change which is happening so fast. So it's just moved into a different level.
Yeah.
How do you grapple with this? And you create a set of regulation, and then the whole thing is obsolete in the next very moment. So how do you? That's a problem.
Yeah. I think I'm. Do you want to add anything, Shirish, sir?
Actually, when I read this in the newspaper, just a few days back, that they are taking it for a revision now, and they're going to give it a relook. I think what you said is very true. That it is very challenging currently because legislations cannot be fully generic, and when it comes to data, they have to be very specific. Again, by the time we discuss this, the way the data gets transferred, the whole ecosystem keeps rising up, and the technology is changing very fast. So I think for the bill to catch up with that itself is a challenge. So I think, yes, it is an enormous task. It's an enormous task. And I could sense that when I was reading it, even in the newspapers. Yeah.
Right. So I think those are all the questions I had. But I just want to sort of summarize and thank Narendra ji, Ateesh ji, and Shirish ji for giving brilliant answers to some of the questions were actually a little bit controversial, not very straightforward. But I think you managed to give really clean and wonderful answers to that. We spoke about digitization and digitalization, how the US and China examples panned out. We spoke about having a portal of portals, and how government is taking a lot of efforts to protect data. Or not only of citizens but also of when the smart cities get built up, looking at granularity of the consent, and of course Narendra ji spoke about not painting entire India with one brush because there are too many nuances around that. Lastly, I learned a lot around the Bharat CISO program and all of that. I'll surely be checking that out. So I'm done with my questions. Do we have any time for audience questions, ma'am? Yeah, maybe one or two questions from the audience if anybody wants to ask. Yeah. Can we get a mic for the audience if that's possible?
Very good evening to all the delegates. My question is regarding Narendra sir and Shirish sir talked about CISO program, right? So when we talk about education, regarding to the education of CISO, there are some of the global certification providers. Like we have to take their education and we have to clear their certification. So why in India we don't have in India a global certification provider agency, just like sir has talked about this Bharat CISO. So it's a university program, right? But we don't have any global agency in India who can provide this kind of certification, who can be accredited by an Indian agency so that they can be a world level, so that like we can provide these certification to the SAARC countries or the APAC countries. So in that scenario, I want your reviews on the same.
So you're...
See, understand what you're talking about. There are many certifications, and most of the certifications you'd find are private organizations, which have started off, and then, they started claiming that our certification is good and all of that. When you look at a CISO, there are, CISO has got, CISO has got a requirement of certain technical skills. There are certain requirement for understanding the regulations and legislation, and there's a requirement to understand the standards also. So you find that it's a multidimensional thing. And some of the certifications that you see that you talk about are very high level sort of certifications that if you really look at the CISO's role, they don't really satisfy. It's like, you have to, then an organization can mix and match and say, that this is what is required to be done. Across the world, we haven't found, at least, from what we have been examining, that says, okay, if he does this one certification that that's required to become a CISO. That sort of a thing is not there currently. So that's a area we have identified as a gap. And that's how we've been working. We've been talking to some of the CISOs to understand exactly what are the skill sets that are required and listing it out and all of that. And when we start working, and that's how this Bharat CISO program is coming. And when they've designed it, it's not that it's been designed in an academic manner. The industry was involved in the design of the program. Yeah. And there's scope for improvement in that. But yes. But as I said, we are working parallelly with NCIPC, which is working with QCI, to come up with a certification framework, in which we are talking of other roles also, in addition to the role of a CISO.
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure, sir.
See, just yesterday, incidentally, I was speaking to a CISO, and on the lighter side, he said to me, should I call myself a CISO or a CIDO? I said, what do you mean by a CIDO? So he said, Chief Information and Digital Officer. So now the latest thing where people are putting that digital tag to their designation. So this is again something which is changing very fast. We have a CTO, we have a CISO, and then you're talking of a digital officer. Again, most of the digital initiatives currently are, sitting at the edge where, you are directly interacting with the customers and trying to collect the data, etc. And some of them are internal to the system with the core network still being there or the core technology still being there. So now it all depends where I'm bringing in these applications. And then again, you'll have to redefine, But yeah, this was just the discussion yesterday with a CISO. It's a right question. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, there's one more. I think this is the last one that we'll take, and then we'll close out.
Hello. Hi, Hardik from 4Core Labs. We are a young cybersecurity startup. So we are trying to revolutionize the way people look at organizational security. So I want to learn from you why people, especially in the Indian landscape, are so immune to change. Like we are still stuck in a reactive approach sort of method for security rather than a proactive approach. Like I would like to know what is your suggestion to bring this cultural change to the organization's security?
As I said, this reactive approach that you talked about, you have specifically observed in a particular, as I said, whole of India you're saying, or certain sessions?
Let me give you an example. Like people don't really care about security until they get
Can you
hacked.
put the mic?
Hello?
Yeah.
So people don't really care about their security until they get hacked. Like once they are hacked, then it's like, okay, I have to invest in some solutions. I have to get some data protection solutions. I have to get more firewalls and all. Like, why don't they have this thought of this change of thought in their mind to go ahead with?
Yeah. I mean, do you think that this is specific only to the the cyberspace? You will find on a road also, you'll find that there's a bend in the road, that this accident is going to be caused. But you will get a speed breaker there only after an accident happens. Correct? You go and see if there's a speed breaker and you ask somebody, whether an accident happened, they will say yes. यहाँ accident हुआ तो उसके बाद speed breaker लगा. Normally the tendency for everybody is to do, because they are concentrated mostly on the business case, their own business. They go ahead with that, and then with the minimum security that is required, and when they find that something happens, then they start looking at it. And it's not only in the cyberspace, it's across. And especially in the cyberspace, when the technologies are so complex and complicated, they really have, when they have to have the skill sets to understand exactly what can go wrong. They don't have an idea of inside of the product, how the product works. They purchase a PC, they purchase a laptop, they purchase an application, then start working on it without exactly knowing, what are the other access mechanisms that are there into that product. So that's a problem. Yes, that is there.
No, I'll just to supplement,
So, no.
So, just to supplement, cyber resilience is something which the government is very, very, strongly working on. It's not just looking at, in the event of a breakdown, not just look at what happens after the breakdown, but what happens before the breakdown, what happens during the breakdown. So there are several, things which are going around to build systems in place so that we have a very strong culture of cyber resilience, which is exactly at the heart of your question. And so while we have, I don't have so many details with me, but I can tell you, we are working on how to get into data storage and recovery, both offline and online backup systems. We also have, we are working on risk evaluation. We're also developing, policies and tools to avoid and absorb such mitigation. And there is, like I said in the beginning, there is another program on breach identification, and also very strongly we are working to develop a very strong culture and system of cyber forensics. So these are all preventive mechanisms. Cyber resilience is one of the big ticket reforms which have to be brought into this space.
See, I think the problem you're having is that you're going to an organization saying, I'm going to protect you, and then say that they won't be understanding what you're trying to do. Yeah, they don't know.
Sort of like that.
You have to tell them what can go wrong. And then, tell that how are you going to mitigate it. So, one of the important points is capacity building is very important, especially with all the new technologies coming in. First thing is the cyber hygiene, that across the board everybody should have cyber hygiene practices. That is one thing that's important. But in addition to that, understanding their own systems and that how do I have a secure, thing built. Yeah, most of them are bought out products, and then they put it together and then start working on that. Yeah. So secure by design is very important. I don't know, but so when you look at any design, when the first meeting happens for designing a product, they look at all the functional requirements of the product and they decide how it's to be done. But that security is also one of the functional requirements, is not something that's considered. So if you list out, like say, my product is supposed to do these things, and then say security is also one of the things that is listed, and that the dialogue starts right at the beginning about in the product design itself, that security also has to be factored, and then you'll find the product also gets designed properly like that. It's a challenge, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I think maybe I'll just end with one small anecdote. You talk about being proactive, reactive. I think when I was doing some research in 1960s in US, there was a professor, Dr. Alan Watson. He had written about privacy and freedom. It's an interesting book if you get to read. So that's how back the privacy concept goes back in the Western world, and we've just started talking about privacy in the last few years. So yeah, it's a long time, and what looks proactive more in the Western world is actually a evolution that is happening happened, which all of them spoke about, that it's happening in India. So I think I'll end the conversation with that and probably hand it over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, and the other thing is, one is at the enterprise level, whatever you're talking about is at the enterprise level, those issues are there. At the national level, you see, there are certain things that proactively that we're doing. One is we are coming up with a national malware repository. Yes, Virus Total is one we've already done that. In the world, we are number 2, and shortly within another 3-4 months, we'll be number 1 in the world. So then once we finish that, we'll expose it to the public also, so that you can submit your malware, and then, we'll analyze it and tell you about it. And we have already given access to the IITs and the triple ITs to access that malware repository for conducting their own research. Then we also the National Cyber Coordination Center, Cyber Coordination Center, where we're doing them at the metadata level. We are having visibility into the traffic to find out, whether predictive analysis of attacks. So they are all in the process of. We also have done a pilot on a national threat exchange, and that at the national level, that national threat exchange also would come. So these are some things that are happening at the national level for protecting the national cyberspace. But yes, there is a challenge at the enterprise level that some of the enterprises have got robust architecture and robust infrastructure with them. But largely, you will find there is a requirement and this scope for a lot of improvement. Maybe people like you, could do a lot of in that. So when you go to a customer, or enterprise, one of the parts of your exercise should be educating him about, what can go wrong. And then tell, how you would be able to help them. If you try to sell your product, I don't think it will be sold.
Thank you so much. Before we close this session, I would like to call upon Mr. V. Sagar, Vice Chairman, ESC, to give out mementos to our esteemed speakers and the chairperson. Can come from that side, sir? We start with our chairperson, Mr. Ateesh Singh, Joint Secretary, Ministry of MSME, Government of India. Thank you, sir, for the presentation. Our moderator, Mr. Jignesh. Our moderator, Mr. Jignesh Oza. He's a partner in KPMG. We have our speaker, Mr. Narendra Nath. He's Joint Secretary, Cyber, National Security Council Secretariat. And we have Mr. Shirish Bapat. Mr. Shirish Bapat, General Manager, LRQA. Thank you so much.